Okay, next up, Vic Poor W5SMM Winlink 2000, an update.
Okay, we're on the air. Last time I talked about internet was internet. Boy, I got to get on the right wavelength here. Talked about Winlink was in, well, I can't talk as fast as Eric did, you know. Was in Des Moines when we were discussing all of the updates to Winlink that we were planning to do. That was 4 years ago, and a lot has gone on in that since then, and most of what we talked about has been implemented. Now, Winlink started back about 1999 as a means of communications that would link people on boats or RVs, hams that were on boats or RVs, into the internet when they were somewhere where they didn't have any access to internet. And certainly the place that it caught on the biggest was with sailors, amateur cruisers. We didn't think of Winlink in any sense as an emergency communications facility. It was simply a last mile facility, in some cases the last 1,000-mile facility for people to handle internet traffic. And in that respect, we didn't build in a lot of redundancy. We didn't actually build in any more capacity than was necessary for that kind of operation. However, once it got established, a number of different groups decided they wanted to use it for emergency communications. And foolishly, I said, sure, why not? We can expand Winlink to do that. If I'd known what I was saying, I probably would have never said it. But it has turned out to be a total rebuild of the original Winlink. To give you an example of the kinds of things that were needed, the original Winlink had a single common message server, which was our link into internet. It was located in Cleveland, Ohio. And we told everybody, you know, from time to time it'll be down for maintenance or the computer may crash or something, and so you may not have service for a day or so, but, you know, get used to it. It's ham radio, it's a hobby. If you want commercial service, go buy it. Then we had a hurricane in Florida, and suddenly there was a flood of traffic coming into our system out of Florida that was emergency communications. Guess what? That's about the time the SysOp up in Cleveland decides he wants to do a backup, which he did and managed to wipe the disk. And that was the end of our system. By the time we got it rebuilt, the emergency was over. Interesting lesson. What Winlink 2000 has become, of course, is a last resort messaging system. And I say last resort because if there's any other method of communications available, you're probably better off than using a system that is as complex and as dependent on other people as this is. Yet it's turned out in practice to be used in virtually every communication emergency instance that's happened in the last 4 or 5 years. In that time, by the way, not only has ARRL and RACES and all these other alphabet groups signed up for internet, but so is the MARS organization. And unbeknownst to me, before MARS adopted Winlink, each of the 3 MARS services had their own digital network. They didn't talk to each other. They also didn't have any interlinkage with internet. Army MARS pushed the idea of a tri-service digital network that all 3 services would use and share frequencies and be able to communicate with each other as well as with the amateur community. And this led to them adopting Winlink as the standard for doing so. One of the services said, fine, we'll join, but we've got some rules. One of them is that we have to have a barrier up here so no ham can talk to a MARS station. Can you believe that? Fortunately, the Army said, well, it's now a dual MARS service, not a tri-service MARS service, but they came around. One of the things we try to emphasize with Winlink is that it is an open system as far as ability from one service or one user to talk to another. There is no barrier between anybody that uses the network from talking or sending a message to anyone else in the network or to any accessible email address outside of the network. Anyone coming in from outside the network only needs to know the domain name, which is winlink.org, and the call sign or the tactical address for the person they're trying to reach within the network. The key features, and these are things we found essential for people who are accustomed to using internet, is you had to have the capability of doing multiple addresses on your messages, something that the old packet mailboxes generally didn't support. We had to have transparent file attachments. You could attach a file in the Winlink system as conveniently as you could attach a file on your internet email system. We wanted to do some reduction in the amount of airtime that amateur messaging took on HF. The packet network, of course, remember we're talking back when packet was still active. A lot of this has died away anyway, and so it's academic, but the packet network was strongly dependent on passing traffic between areas outside of VHF reach on HF. And it was going to become, at the rate things were going, it was going to become a serious congestion problem. It was going to be a serious problem with respect to the amount of spectrum that was being devoted on HF to this kind of service. And our argument is that if internet is available, use it and keep off the HF spectrum. If it's not available, then we have an emergency and let's use it then and then only. Leave the rest of the spectrum available for the contesters and for the keyboarders and for everybody else who wants to use HF. Another thing we wanted to do was to eliminate the concept of the home BBS, again, because the old packet systems did typically require that you have a home BBS and that be known through the white pages throughout the network. And if you happen to be in some other city that particular day, there was no real way of getting your messages. With the Winlink design, we wanted a system that no matter who you connected with anywhere in the world, if it was a Winlink station, your message was immediately available to you. And that's worked out very successfully. Winlink is a wide area system, so it doesn't matter whether you're in South Africa or in San Diego, you see the same network, you see the same traffic available to you all the time. We wanted very rapid delivery of messages. Again, we were trying to improve on the packet system. Because of HF forwarding and because of the congestion, it would sometimes take a day or two for a message to get through, and at that it was only a text message. This was not terribly useful in an emergency environment. As our previous speaker made clear, you need bandwidth, you need capacity, and you need it now. And we're doing the best we can with Winlink to achieve those goals on a global basis. And of course, our experience with the little hurricane we had in Florida that year is that we obviously needed a redundant system. And we redesigned the way the central message server worked so that we have 5 mirrored sites. We have a site in Australia, 2 sites in the United States, 1 run by DHS. We have a site in Canada and a site in Europe now. And we feel that that probably gives us a fair amount of backup in the case of California slipping off into the ocean or some other problem, somebody bombing Washington, you name it. We still have a partial network that does work and allows exchanges of traffic. Also, we wanted the ability for people who had working access to internet to be able to simply go on the web, identify themselves on a web page, and send and receive messages that way. Of course, that's probably the first thing that's going to go in a real emergency situation. sometimes I have trouble trying to describe how Winlink works, but I came up with this idea of representing it as a stack. Those of you who are familiar with OSI stacks, this is not that, but it's a convenient way of describing it. At the very bottom of the stack is the user, and then certainly in the typical emergency environment, that user is in a Red Cross building, or it's in an EOC, or it's in a fire department, or in a hospital. And it's a user that is not a ham, and it's a user that is sitting at a computer that normally runs an email program, something he's familiar with. He's running Outlook or Eudora or whatever. So the access into Winlink is from that user's email through a POP3 SMTP interface into a program called PACLink. And PACLink, in turn, takes those messages and puts it in a form that's familiar to the Winlink system, and then passes it on up via radio to an RMS site, RMS standing for Radio Message Server. And that can be either packet or Pactor. Now, we tend to emphasize packet because it's readily available everywhere, and most communications, emergency communications, is local. And there's no reason, again, to tie up an HF, a portion of the HF spectrum for dealing something that's only covering a particular county or a particular limited region. Those servers, in turn, can connect to a program which we call RMS Relay. RMS Relay, oh, I should come back to PACLink for a second. Within this framework, if there are two users on the same local area network that are talking to PACLink, and their message goes as far as PACLink, PACLink will reroute it back to the destination if that's one of the addresses in the message. Otherwise, it gets pushed up the stack till it reaches Relay. Now, Relay is the first point at which we start to look at internet as a method of communications. Relay is a complete freestanding message switch. So everybody in this stack below Relay can now talk to each other. And this is typically a regional system. For example, this kind of network is being used in the Houston, South Texas area as communications, but was heavily used during the recent hurricane there. When internet is available and hasn't been knocked out by virtue of some local catastrophe, any message that is passed to Relay is immediately at internet speeds passed to the central message server. Now, remember, there's 5 of these. There can be any number of these, and these in turn multiply down to these, and there can be any number of these. So even though I show one box at a time, we're talking going from a very large number of users up to one of 5 CMS sites. Relay itself goes out on the network and searches for a CMS site, and it doesn't care which one it finds. The first one it finds is the one it uses. The sites themselves are all mirrored, so all the traffic that's on any one site is on all the others. Above that is the web server. We only have one web server because, for one thing, it's not mission critical. Its mission is to provide a web access for people to receive messages via sources other than ham radio, and also to maintain statistics about the traffic. You can go on the web server itself, and if I can get this machine to work later, I'll demonstrate it. We can show you the status of the network, who all in that stack is operational. We also, another way of looking at it is to look at what I call a short stack, not to be confused with pancakes. In short stack, the individual user can be a ham with a radio link, and typically what he uses in that case is something called airmail or Outlook or even a simple terminal. The, that individual client program, whatever he chooses to use, and there's lots of things, none of those programs are considered to be Winlink programs. They're just generally available programs. Can talk over a packet link to an RMS packet server, or in more limited cases over PACTOR on HF. And of course, that's what the guy who's on his RV in the mountains or on a sailboat out in the Pacific uses to reach a message server. And then from there, that device talks directly to the CMS, and he immediately has access to all of the traffic that's available. As a practical matter, I should say that on day-to-day use, during non-emergency conditions, this is the stack that you see used the most. Going back to the bottom of the stack again, what is the functions within this area? The PAC link sits on a local area network, or and in some more limited cases on a single computer, but normally on a LAN. And this LAN, by the way, can be over quite a wide area, but it is not part of internet. A common configuration which we support is this link in here is actually D-Star. D-Star D1, the 90 kilobit interface, or other form of Wi-Fi service. I know of one installation that uses a 900 megahertz Ethernet link to connect routers in to form a local area network that covers several buildings. That point in the PAC link looks to the user like a internet mail service. It's a POP3 SMTP server. You have an account on it which is either your call sign or a tactical address if you're not an amateur. And that in turn holds messages in a storage bin long enough for that service to then to go out over whatever ports are available. If the internet is functional at that point, sometimes internet will be down for a time and then back up again. If that's functional, that is the preferred outlet. The PAC link will immediately grab all the messages it's got in its bin and move them up to the CMS, pull down anything that's pending up at the top level to be distributed locally. Otherwise, it goes out either through HF or VHF. We have a priority system that says use TCP/IP first if it's available. If not, use packet, and you can search for any number of packet ports that are supporting RMS, or all else fails, fall back to HF and use that valuable piece of spectrum. I'm not sure this is going to show us much. That's what a PAC link screen might look like, but the actual user doesn't deal with that program. That's something that's basically sits in the closet. Here's how you would configure a PAC link if you're putting it in for the first time, and you identify who's going to be the sysop, what call sign he's going to use, and the characteristics of that system, and you select 4 different CMS sites which you're going to go pull for. This is how you would enter a tactical account, in other words, an email address for an individual user who's going to be accessing Winlink through the POP3 interface. This is a typical configuration page for how you would set up PAC link to access the various types of channels. This one is for setting up a TNC channel. So what does the RMS packet node look like? Well, it's pretty simple, actually. The access to the PAC link can either be with a typical Cantronics or time wave packet TNC, and we do that through a direct drivers for those 2 manufacturers. Or if you just have a generic TNC, you can go through AGW and access it through KISS mode. When you connect to the box through this, and you may have multiple connections, this thing will serve a number of channels at the same time. For each connection you make, a TCP IP connection is then made upstream immediately into either RMS relay if there is no internet functioning, or if the internet is functioning at that point, that TNC connection is made directly to the CMS at the top of the stack. This is what you would see if you were running what the window would look like. It shows the transactions that are taking place on the radio side and the transactions that are taking place on the TCP side. And again, here how you would configure such an installation. Installation, we try to make as drop-in as we can. You install the software, and as soon as you run it, these boxes pop up and lead you through the configuration. Pactor works a lot like the packet. As soon as you connect, Pactor being on HF and being limited to one connection at a time, you normally only have one user entering the gateway at the time, and that user in turn is immediately connected through TCP IP either to, again, to the RMS relay, which provides local message switching, or directly up to the CMS. Well, I should mention too, the Pactor RMS sites use HF radios that are capable of scanning. These radios typically scan 1 or 2 frequencies on 2 or 3 bands, and they do so fairly rapidly. They have a dwell time of typically about 3 seconds per frequency. And so a user can pick the frequency that is most likely to get to that particular station under given propagation conditions and make his connection. Again, this is what the screen would look like on an RMS Pactor for RMS Pactor sysop. It shows, again, the transactions that are taking place between the site and the user, and on the other side between the RMS site and either RMS relay or the CMS site. Relay itself is a small message switching system. It can bring all the traffic in from the RMS ports and hold the traffic, reroute it, send it back to users that are below that point in the stack, or as long as there's an internet connection running, it'll make a direct connection to the CMS and move the traffic up. In addition, relay will have the capability of forwarding the traffic on HF. This is not an automatic mechanism, however. This requires operator intervention. We feel it's kind of socially unacceptable to have a fully automatic message passing system on HF, because the machine can't reliably determine that a channel is clear and can pass data safely, even though it's legal to do so in the subbands, the automatic subbands. The design of the system is such that we try to encourage the users to do it manually. So that means that if you're in a real emergency, an operator should be staffing that site and making sure that the traffic is moving. And he can also use his brain, which is helpful, to determine what's the best propagation, whether the channel is moving fast enough, whether it's causing interference, and so on. And then the top of the stack is the central message server. Now that's a fairly complex piece of software, or several pieces of software. It's as I say, there's 5 sites. And on one side, the site has direct access to internet. Of course, here we are dependent on internet for the system to perform its functions. On one side is the internet, the other side is what we call the CMS database, which holds all of the traffic, data about users, registration information, passwords, all kinds of things. The site itself is broken up into a group of individual programs. Starting at the top of that group is the site monitor, which simply monitors the condition of the other programs that are running, and it in turn reports up from this point to the website the status of the network. And so when you go to the website and you look up network status, this is the program that's supplying that data. Below that is what we call a queue processor. It accepts every message coming in, looks at the header information, decides where to put it, where it's going to go, what priority it has, and so on. There's the telnet server. Telnet is the basic protocol we use for passing data into the CMS from lower levels in the stack. All the traffic passes at each CMS passes through that server that come from radio sources. Below that is the SMTP server. That receives messages from internet mail and puts them in the database for the queue processor to pick up and route to the users in the system. We also have what we call a SMTP client, which takes all the messages in the database that are headed out to internet addresses and sees to it that they get delivered to those mailboxes. We have the CMS link. This is the synchronizing program that causes the sites, the 5 CMS sites, to remain synchronized or mirrored. We have an inquiries processor, which is a special service where a user can send a message to the system and say, look, I'd like the weather for Tampa Bay, or I'd like to know, I'd like to get a news bulletin from a particular source. I'd like to get, there's actually thousands of entries into this thing. There's a published catalog of available data that you can inquire for, and this packages it up in the most efficient form. You can take a large image from a weather channel. We repackage it, compress it, send it over the radio channel with the best efficiency we can. Efficiency is not something that Internet's famous for, but we try to do our best to reduce the footprint, you might say, of a message from the inquiries processor and pass it to the user. This gets widely used, again, in emergency services. And probably the single-wise biggest user of that are, again, sailors who are at sea and want to keep track of the weather while they're traveling. And then we have a positions report processor. Each time a station connects, if they include either latitude and longitude or grid square, most of this is done automatically and transparently. The user doesn't have to do anything explicitly. It gets picked up by the system, passed to that program, which then maintains a database of positions and timestamps and also weather reports if they're included in the report for each user. That in turn links through to APRS so that you can see those position reports using the RPS system. And it also passes any weather reports that are made through to an amateur-based service, which then provides weather reports worldwide to the various national weather services, including the U.S. National Weather Service. This is widely used, again, mainly by offshore sailors. Lastly, we have the web itself. We have one website. We try to keep it up all the time, but it is not mission critical, and it does not trouble us much when we have to take it down for maintenance or something of that sort. The current deployment, this was at the time I wrote this, which was about 3 or 4 months ago. We had 5 CMS sites, about 150 Pactor gateway sites. We had about 800 packet gateways around the country, or around the world, and there were about 13,000 registered users. Anybody who uses the system registers. It's usually a fairly automatic process. If they become inactive, they get purged off the system. So the number of users that are registered and known to us can vary from time to time. If you want to know more about it, or you just want to see what it looks like, the thing to do is to go to the Winlink winlink.org site. Are there any questions?
Okay, the question is I've used Winlink as a AX25 packet user connecting to a Winlink node. And every so often I would connect and find out if there's any messages for me and so on and so forth. And from time to time, Winlink sends user messages, and one of the user messages mentions something about white pages and how you have to get, now it's not automatic, and I'm not sure how that all works. How do I register this white pages thing that Winlink has told me about?
White pages is no longer used. That's history. I don't know when you used it last, but we don't use white pages anymore.
Okay, then I must have misunderstood the note, because the note, as far as I knew, said that white pages was mandatory now and had to be used, and you had to go to the website and do something, which I didn't understand what you had to do.
Well, there was.
White pages has never been used.
White pages has never been mandatory, and so I don't know what message you got, but we have ceased using white pages. It was too difficult to manage. It was not as effective as we had hoped in preventing spam, but we do have an anti-spam mechanism now that's proven out to be virtually 100% effective.
Okay, well, I guess I read it wrong. Thank you.
All right.
My question is, I guess, a newbie question, but I'm still having trouble understanding the rationale of justification, I should say, to allow incoming message from the general public into a winlink.org email address. You know, if it's initiated by somebody in the general public, and I'm a Part 97 user.
Well, I doubt that the general public is much of a user, but it depends on what you mean by it. You can access the system from your regular internet email, but if you don't know who you're sending a message to, and you have to be sending a message to somebody who's a registered qualified user, it's not going to go anywhere. If you send a message blind into WinLink, it just gets bit bucketed.
So are you saying that, say the wife wants to send you a message from work, she
Right.
can't do it unless she's licensed?
No, but you have to be licensed to receive it.
And I guess that's where my question is how the traffic coming from the general public internet, from the general public, where I would say, I'm a newbie, all right? So my impression is that you had to have traffic was only between
No, that's
licensed
not
users.
true. That's not true at all. Third-party traffic is perfectly legal in this country, and in fact, in most countries now.
He has to initiate the request for the message from his wife. Maybe that would help.
Well, he doesn't, I mean, he has to tell her how to do it, yes, if you consider that a request, but he's free to do that.
Yes, sir. I email a lot of sailboats all over the world. I'm an avid sailor myself, originally from South Africa, now live in Chicago here. It seems to me, having used the system quite extensively with these sailboats all over the place, that there are big areas where WinLink is not covering the whole globe. Many of these sailboats also run sail mail in a parallel, but they have to pay for the service, like $250 a year or something. Is there a way in which we can increase the coverage, please? For instance, South America doesn't have one single RMS showing up on the website. It's notoriously been left out of the system, and Africa has only 2 RMSs right now, and the one in Hawaii has totally dropped off the spectrum. It's not there anymore.
Well, it's a volunteer service, and it is ham radio, and we certainly welcome anyone, especially outside the U.S., who wants to provide the service, but we can't buy it. I can't pay somebody to do it. It's all volunteer, and there's no way to create we can't turn it into a commercial service.
But you should have 3,000 or 4,000 or 5,000 mile range if you're on a sailboat.
I agree with that, but the point is that these guys, they sit on their sailboat, and he needs to look for a time during the day to be able to connect, to get propagation to connect. and he runs out of time at some certain point in time. I just talked to a guy 2 weeks ago. I followed him all the way from Panama to the Marquesas, 3,000 miles and 30 days on the water. He ran out of propagation halfway, 1,500 miles away from shoreline, and his wife started getting ill, became sick. He finally got hold of some doctors through the system on the catalog to get through to him, but he was starting to run out of propagation. We need more of these RMSs. We certainly need the Hawaii one, please.
Problem is it's all volunteers, so what you need to do is get on the sailing magazines and recruit people to start running systems at home.
Okay.
When they're not sailing, get licenses in their own system.
I understand. So that's true. But then we run into the SCS, into the TNCs. You know, people don't have, especially in South America and Africa, they don't have the money to buy these TNCs. Yes, if volunteers would like to give them the TNCs, we can have more of these RMSSR.
Well, you just gave us a great lead into the next talk.
My question is actually similar to the question back there about Part 97. So if his wife sends an email into the system, she doesn't know at that point how it's going to be routed, whether it's internet, that's perfectly fine. If it's routed and causes a HF or VHF amateur transmitter to transmit, did she cause it to transmit? So part of it is the transmission part, access to an amateur transmitter. The second part of my question is, what about allowable content? So, for example, maybe she sends something that's pornographic or who knows what, and we're transmitting that over amateur transmitters. How is that controlled or policed or monitored, et cetera?
Well, I'm not going to police it. The guy that polices it is the guy whose license is at stake, and that's the user who gets on there and connects to the system and sends and receives traffic. If you have somebody on there that is sending you or trying to send you information that is inappropriate for ham radio, you don't have to take the connection or take the message. You can also, there's mechanisms for killing the message without passing it, if you know in advance. And if there's somebody who is chronic about it, you can also ask the network administrator to block that user from the system. We're not policemen. I'm not going to start being a policeman. If you're going to have a system that is at all useful, we can't all be standing around looking over each other's shoulder to see if you did something bad. It's just not in the cards. Yes, sir.
I ran the one of the MSIS BBSs here in Chicago 15 years ago, 20 years ago. And we talked with Mr. DuPont at the FCC as part of the packet radio thing. And he made it quite clear to me that if I originated the message as the first RF point on the message, then I was responsible for it.
That was 20 years ago.
Have they changed?
Yes, sir. It's now the responsibility primarily of the user who connects to the system. The fact that you are operating a station that relays traffic through ham radio is secondary. Now, in this day and age, for example, we have no 100% way of preventing spam. We get rid of 99.9% of it. But probably every piece of spam that goes out there is not legal on ham radio. But we've worked very closely with the FCC and how we have built and administer this system. And they're very comfortable with how we do it. But if you've got somebody who abuses the system, it's up to the user who's being the recipient of that to put a stop to it. And there's a lot of ways of doing that. But the fact that you sent one message or two messages that might break the rules is not going to turn into a federal case. I mean, it just wouldn't make sense. We'd have to close the system down if we said, oh, somebody might do something illegal. Yes, sir.
If we were to drop the whole message contact thing and assume that the message content was perfectly acceptable, then you're asking my question in a different way, I think, and I still really haven't. I think I'm hearing that it's okay for anybody to, for the general internet to send a message into the radio, Part 97 system.
Never turn the transmitter off. It's the guy who initiates the connection, the one, you know, the guy on the sailboat, for example, he starts the connection. The server never calls him. He always calls the server.
And says what he got for him.
Yes, and that's completely legal.
And he gives the permission to send it to them, so he's responsible. That's what it said. The recipient is responsible for that.
Thank you very much, Vic.